Hello, lovely viewers. You are most welcome to our channel Poetry Online. In this video, we shall be presenting to you a detailed analysis of the play The Blinkards by kobina Sekyi, Act 1 to Act 4. Kindly subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to get updates on all our new videos. Once again, let us assure you of a very interesting discussion. Get ready for this lesson. The Blinkards is a satirical comedy that exposes the negative attitude of a society towards their own social, cultural, and even political values, and rather sees the values of the colonial master as superior and preferable. The action centers on Mrs. Brofesem, as the name implies, whose brief travel to England has produced in her the self-delusion that African culture is backward and must yield to the finer values of the European. If she is the protagonist, then Mr. Oyumze, the knowledgeable personality and African cultural advocate, is her ruthless antagonist. The play parades on stage a cast of characters of varied economic and social status. Indeed, they represent the entire society, high and low. Among the most memorable roles are Mr. Brofesem, a merchant, Mr. Oyumze, a young barrister, Mr. Siba, a cocoa magnate, Dr. Onyeye, a physician and surgeon, Mr. Okadu, a young blood, Miss Siba, Nasompa, Nanakatawewa, a parson, members of the Cosmopolitan Club, Ahintarfo, the educated and westernized, Atamfurafo, the illiterate, fishermen, policemen, a white man, etc. The play is truly among the best in Ghanaian theatre classics. Act 1. Nyamiche is on his usual task of cleaning up the sitting room of Mr. and Mrs. Brofesem. He finds the place messy with ashes of cigar and dried leaves in the pages of a book. As he is about to tidy up the place, Mrs. Brofesem storms in and explains that the ashes are meant to kill the moths in the carpet. Also, the leaves in the pages of the book are commonplace in England, a mark of civilization. She tries to practice all the things and mannerisms she observed in England. Mr. Brofesem enters to register his regret on his wife's visit to England, especially its effects on the entire home and society. He also worries about the must-do syndrome, thus wearing of pajamas, the use of daki instead of dear, singing English songs, and kissing whenever the man is nice. Mr. Siba arrives and shows admiration of Mrs. Brofesem's new ways of doing things and requests that she mentors his daughter, Miss Siba, to become English. Miss Siba plans to run away if she is not allowed to speak her fancy language. In Mr. Oyumze's apartment, Mr. Okadu has called on the lawyer who has just come from the court. Mr. Oyumze feels well at home in his traditional outfit. Okadu was asked that the lawyer employs him as a clerk, so that the experience he will gain from working under a bintu or a boga, a successful lawyer, will make him fit enough to marry Miss Siba. As soon as Mr. Okadu leaves, Mrs. Brofesem appears with Miss Siba, ostensibly to greet a colleague bintu. This visit offers the opportunity for Mr. Oyumze to know who the object of Okadu's interest is, thus Miss Siba. Mrs. Brofesem displays her aversion for the traditional way Mr. Oyumze goes about doing things. He insists on being traditional. When the two ladies leave, Mr. Oyumze expresses misgivings about the sort of training Miss Siba is about to receive from her mentor, Mrs. Brofesem. Act 2. The action takes us to Victoria Park in Cape Coast, where people have gathered to participate in the garden party. All but Mr. Oyumze have put on European dresses. Mr. Oyumze is apprehensive about the kinds of European games lined up for the youngsters. Mr. Okadu has attended the party purposely to take advantage of the situation to win Miss Siba's love. He is given definitive directives by Mr. Oyumze as to how to go about it. In a poetic rendition, Okadu prides himself with the level of Europeanization and civilization he has attained. Mrs. Brofesem and the other young ladies and gentlemen go for the games, leaving Miss Siba, who has complained of headache, behind. Okadu manages to overcome his nervousness and gets acquainted to the lady. The young ladies are full of admiration for Mrs. Brofesem's European fashion and manners. sit Mr. Oyumze down and quiz him on his taste of native things. He explains the difference between studying in England and having English education to them. He shows reverence to the fancy old people for their wisdom, health, dignity, and respectability. He advises Okadu strongly against the so-called engagement between him and Miss Siba in the English fashion and offers a personal opinion to Okadu to observe the native custom so as to avoid troubles in the future. In Mr. Siba's house, Siba is at table, trying to use a set of cutlery set in order to be civilized. Mrs. Professor enters with Okadu to inform Mr. Siba that his daughter and Okadu are engaged and that they are preparing for a wedding in the chapel. After initial reaction of protest, Mr. Siba agrees when Mrs. Professor convinces him that it is done in England. Mrs. Professor and Okadu leave, and Mr. Siba discloses the news to Nasumpa, his wife. The woman becomes so upset that she leaves the house. Oyemze has invited Okadu to his house. When he arrives, the lawyer reprimands him for the wrong moves and scheming regarding the outrageous engagements and wedding of Miss Siba. He tells Okadu that he, Oyemze, doesn't want any further harassment from Nasumpa, Miss Siba's mother. He threatens to dismiss Okadu if he doesn't make the necessary amends. Okadu goes out but rushes back to take cover in lawyer Oyemze's room after he has been attacked by Inasompa on the stairs. The woman follows immediately in a rage, insults Mr. Oyemze, and threatens to massacre Okadu. Inasompa collapses and the doctor is sent for by Mr. Oyemze. Dr. Onyeye comes to pronounce her dead, probably due to heart failure. Dr. Onyeye in his consulting room, a black doctor, he is faced with quite a number of challenges. His nephew, Kwesi, for example, goes to the operating room, picks one of the sterilized knives, and cuts his swollen hand with it. He, the doctor, receives a letter in which he has been accused by Mr. Wumpim of having an amorous relationship with his wife. A schoolgirl, who has feigned sickness, comes to tempt him to seduce her. Mr. and Miss Siba visit the hospital with an ailment. After close examination, Dr. Nyeye discovers that Miss Siba is 4 months pregnant. Mr. Siba makes all efforts to bribe the doctor to abort the pregnancy to avoid disgrace. Dr. Onyeye is able to manage all the challenges without compromising the principles and values of his medical profession. At the Cosmopolitan Club meeting, members who believe to have traveled far and wide, have a lot of confidence in themselves, discuss matters of collective interest, especially how to be gentlemen. They also talk about the importance artisans like tailors, hatters, and shoemakers. They cherish European items of ham, bacon, milk, marmalade, jam, lemonade, beer, stouts, champagne, brandy, whiskey, soda, rum, and gin. They think that palm wine is only taken by bushmen. Mr. Okado adds that the introduction of churches and lorries has made wedding possible and asserts that Europeans are very important in that regard. An invitation to the wedding of Okadu and Miss Siba, extended to the club members, is read out officially. They all promise to be present. Few additions to their regulations and code of conduct are also announced. For instance, they decide that no member of the club must greet people in traditional wear, and that during daytime, the local language, Fancy, must not be spoken by members. The whole discussion is characterized by high-sounding words and speeches. A wedding reception takes place at Halminton House in Cape Coast. Members of the Cosmopolitan Club are in attendance, some women in native dress. Mrs. Professor and the girls are also there. The bride and bridegroom, Miss Siba and Okadu, arrive, and the wedding cake and drinks are served. The members of the Cosmopolitan Club are full of excitement as they take over the whole ceremony. Their speeches, as usual, are full of big words, some of which are meaningless. When Grandfather Akodi gives a piece of advice in Fancy, the native language, members of the Cosmopolitan Club protest and leave. Nana Katawewa, Miss Siba's grandmother, rushes to disrupt the whole ceremony, slapping Okadu in the face. She whisks Miss Siba away. People are seen going about their normal activities. Some are playing games. Some fishermen are mending their nets. Two fishermen meet to discuss briefly the harsh conditions of life. This is the area around Anakata West premises. Mr. Siva appears and is soon followed by Mr. Okadu and a police constable. Ms. Siva is to be arrested and charged for bigamy. This creates conflict between Mr. Siva and Okadu. After they have been separated by the policeman, Ms. Siva is arrested in Nanakatawe West house. Mr. Oyimze is at his office working. The minister of the church enters to warn the lawyer for winning the court case for the Sibas. The person, full of vengeance, menacingly threatens and curses the learned lawyer. Mrs. Professor comes in to congratulate lawyer Oyimze for winning such a difficult and sensational case and thereby becoming famous. Nanakata Wirwa, Mr. Siba, and Miss Siba also come in to thank lawyer Oyimze for relieving them. The lawyer explains that he played a part in creating the mess, and so it is his moral obligation to ensure that the right things are done. He therefore offered to charge them nothing for his efforts. The person and the lawyer further exchange harsh words, while lawyer Oyinze blames the person for contributing partly to the moral decadence that has crippled the whole society. The person also calls the lawyer a child of Satan and storms out. Mrs. Professor returns to her drawing room with an endorsed photograph of Mr. Oyimze. She enters her room to get a frame for it. Nyamiche, their houseboy, who is heavily drunk and is reeking of alcohol, enters. He messes up the room and mimics Mrs. Professor's funny manners. Mrs. Professor returns to the drawing room only to be subjected to an attack by the houseboy, who forcibly tries to kiss her. As they struggle, Mr. Professor enters to separate them. He threatens to deal drastically with Nyamiche for his bad behavior. Mr. Professor practices how to wear the native dress, thus, the cloth and sandals. He also sings some traditional tunes with piano accompaniment. Mrs. Professor appears simply dressed in native outfit and feels rather comfortable. Two men in European clothing join Mr. Professor. They recount their encounter with a lorry that ran past them on their way. The men wonder why Mr. Professor is going native. He takes his time to explain and defend African cultural values and the regard he now has for lawyer Oyimze, the marriage ordinance of 1844, and Mr. Oyimze's legal argument that freed Ms. Siba are explained clearly to the men. Mr. Professor succeeds in disabusing the minds of the two men about their belief in European foods and drinks and acknowledging the suitability of African ways of life to the African climate. Thanks for watching this video. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video.